أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله به نستعين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. First of all, I just want to thank you all for inviting me. This is sort of an introductory talk because Hadith is often, I remember when I first became Muslim and I started learning about Hadith, I always would ask questions about Hadith and people would say, brother, don't even think about it. It's too complicated. Don't even try. It's just such a deep science. You'll never understand it. Don't even think about it. So I said, okay, well, I guess I shouldn't learn about Hadith. And then when I went to graduate school, alhamdulillah, they were actually some older students who were studying Hadith, and they sort of introduced me to how to start learning about Hadith and studying with teachers and things like that, and reading sort of introductory books. And I started learning, and I found it's actually not that difficult a science. In fact, Hadith is a very common sense science. It's a very common sense tradition, and it's something that Muslims should be very proud of. And I have no problem saying this. I say it very, very confidently as a scholar that the Hadith tradition in Islam is one of the biggest accomplishments in human intellectual history. It's just a tremendous accomplishment in terms of its breadth and its depth and its complexity and its internal consistency. And it's something that Muslims should be very proud of, and something Muslims should be happy to learn about, even if they're just starting out, because as the famous Chinese saying says, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. So hopefully this will just be a very short introduction to some of the history of Hadith collection and the purposes of Hadith in Islamic civilization. The first question is, what is a Hadith? Very simple question. What is a Hadith? Hadith is a statement of the Prophet ﷺ, a communication about an action the Prophet did ﷺ, or something that was done in his presence to which he did not object. Something done in his presence to which he did not object. We'll talk about examples of these in a second. I think we've all know examples of sayings of the Prophet. For example, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. All deeds are judged by intentions. Right? Things that the Prophet did. How did he pray? Right? Reports about how he prayed, about how he fasted, about how he sat, about how he drank. Right? Things that were done in his presence. That people ate lizard in his presence, and he didn't say that this is wrong. If he didn't say it's wrong, it must be right. So these are the three types of hadiths: sayings, actions, and things done in his presence to which he did not object. Every hadith consists of two things. It consists of an isnad and the metin. What is the isnad? The isnad is the chain of transmission for that metin. The metin is the actual text of the hadith. So those examples I just gave, for example, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, all deeds are judged by intentions. This is the metin of the hadith, the actual statement of the Prophet. Or if I said the Prophet used to walk in this way, that would be the metin of the hadith, describing what the Prophet did. The isnad is the chain of transmission by which we know that hadith. So for example, the hadith of all deeds are judged by intentions is narrated. Let's say we'll take the Muwatta of Imam Malik, from Yahya bin Sa'id al-Ansari, from Muhammad ibn Ibrahim, from Alqamah bin Waqqas, from Omar ibn al-Khattab, who heard the Prophet say, all deeds are judged by intentions. So that's the isnad. And here I have some just examples of some hadiths that come from major hadith collections, Sunni hadith collections. This is from the famous Sahih al-Bukhari, the Sahih of Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari. He says, it was narrated to us by Yusuf ibn Musa. It was narrated to us. Now Yusuf ibn Musa is saying, it was narrated to us by Abu Usama, who says, it was narrated to me by Al-A'mash, from Khaythama, from the companion Adi ibn Hatim, who said that the Messenger of God, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, said, there is not one amongst you except that he will be spoken to directly by his Lord with no translator or any barrier separating them. In other words, on the Day of Judgment. So this is a very important hadith because it tells us actually about something that's going to happen on the Day of Judgment. It means that we're all going to come into direct contact with God on the Day of Judgment. Right? Here's a second hadith from a very famous Sunni hadith collection, the Sunan of Abu Dawud as-Sijistani. He says, it was narrated to us by Muhammad ibn Dawood ibn Sufyan, who says it was narrated to us by Yahya bin Hassan, who said it was narrated to us by Sulaiman ibn Musa, who said it was narrated to us by Ja'far ibn Sa'd, who said it was narrated to me by Khubayb ibn Sulaiman, from his father, from the companion Samara ibn Jundub, who said in a speech, he was giving a speech, "Indeed, the messenger of God, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, would order us to pay a charity on things we were preparing for sale." So this is very important because it helps us know about zakat. So if I'm preparing something for sale, let's say I'm producing something that I'm going to sell, like a saddle, let's say, or a saddle blanket, right? Maybe I'm almost finished, I'm going to get it ready to sell. I actually have to pay charity tax on these things. Or these things, the potential income, let's say. Actually, exactly how this, now that I think about it, exactly how this hadith would be interpreted is very complicated. I don't want to get into that because I know I'll make a mistake. This is from a less famous hadith collection, somebody who died later than Bukhari and Abu Dawood, someone named Abu al-Qasim Sulaiman al-Tabarani, who died in 971 of the Common Era, 360 of the Hijri calendar. He said it was narrated to us by Ahmed bin Mansur al-Jindi Sapuri. It was narrated to him by Ali bin Harb, and it was reported to him by Ash'ath ibn Attaf, from Abdullah bin Habib, from a Sha'bi, from the companion Jabir ibn Abdullah, that the messenger of God bought a camel from me and then let me ride it back into the city. So this hadith is interesting in two ways. One, it tells us about the character of the Prophet, ﷺ, which is that he's very generous and conscientious of other people's needs. And second, it says that you can sell something to somebody, and then you can actually use it after that. Maybe with that person's permission. There's nothing wrong with that, right? So it has ethical implications. It also has practical legal implications. These are just a few examples of hadiths the Prophet said. Another important thing to remember when we talk about hadith is that if you imagine I say something in this lecture, right? And then all of you leave the room and you all go back to your homes and your friends and your families, and you tell them about something I said. There's going to be a lot of different versions of what I said, right? Let's say I say, always be nice to your mother, right? Let's say Usman can go home and say, Dr. Jonathan said that it's very important to be nice to your mother. And Moise can say, he said it's part of a Muslim's behavior to be nice to your mother, right? So you actually get different versions of the same report, even though the original report was only one thing. And all the different versions generally get the same meaning, although they might actually be some important shades of distinction, right? And this is the difference between a tradition and a narration. When we talk about a tradition, this is the general thing the Prophet said. This is the general report he said. The narrations are the different manifestations and versions of that we find in the different hadith collections. So, here's just an example of how complicated this can get. This is one hadith, right? Oh, this is way too small. There's no way you're going to be able to read it, is it? Okay, I'll read it to you then. So, don't worry about the details. You can just see the complexity. All these things, here's the Prophet here. All these are different chains of transmission that lead to different books. And you can see some of them go through the same people and then branch out later on. Some of them start from different companions. All these people heard the Prophet say something like, "Our Lord descends each night to the lowest level of heavens in the last third of the night and says, 'Who will call upon me that I may answer? Who will ask me that I may give? Who seeks my forgiveness that I may forgive them?'" There's another version which says, "Indeed, God bides His time until when a third of the night has passed, He descends to the lowest heaven and says, 'Is there anyone seeking forgiveness? Is there anyone seeking penance? Is there anyone seeking,' etc., 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 until the dawn breaks." Or another version says, "God descends to the lowest heaven during the second half or the last third of the night and says, 'Who will call upon me?'" So you have all these different versions, and they differ on when this actually happens. When does God descend? Is it during the first third of the night, or is it during the last third of the night, or is it during the second half of the night? But the general meaning is the same, which is God comes down closer to the human beings, and to answer the prayers of those people who stayed up awake at that time of night, right? So in general, if you stay up at night, God is going to be more attentive to your prayers because you've sort of demonstrated your piety and your commitment by doing this. Just to be clear, this doesn't mean that God actually physically moves. A lot of people understand this as meaning that God is coming closer to us in the sense that He's going to respond to our prayers, right? Sometimes these differences in narrations can have a big legal impact, or a big impact in how we understand the value that the hadith is telling us or is teaching us. The most famous hadith is Man kadhaba alayya muta'ammidan falyatabawwa maq'adahu min an-nar. Whoever misrepresents me intentionally, let him prepare for himself a seat in hellfire. So the Prophet is saying, whoever lies about me intentionally, this is something that's going to send this person to hell. The most famous hadith. Depends on which scholar you ask. There's anywhere between 60 to 100 companions who narrated this hadith. So you can see on this chart you have basically 3 companions who narrate this hadith. There's 100 companions. Then imagine how many branches go off from there. I mean, thousands and thousands of narrations of this hadith. Now, most of the versions, the version of Anas bin Malik and Abu Huraira and other companions say, whoever lies about me intentionally, whoever misrepresents me intentionally. There's one version of the hadith narrated by the companion Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr. It says, whoever misrepresents me, no mention of intention, let him prepare for himself a seat in hellfire. So you can see there's a big difference between this version and the other versions. Because that means that if I just accidentally misquote a hadith, or accidentally attribute something to the Prophet that he didn't say, that would actually earn me a seat in hellfire. Or that would be worthy of somebody who deserves to be in hell. So you can see that there's actually a big distinction between these differences. So between these different narrations. So I'm not trying to say that that these narrations, that because they're all reflections of some initial statement, original statement, that there's no differences. There are oftentimes very important differences. And so which version a scholar chooses can have a big legal impact, or impact on theology, or impact on the values we have as Muslims. But it's also very important, because oftentimes you'll hear people say, that's a weak hadith, or that hadith's not reliable. But what are they talking about? For example, I can tell you that this hadith here is unreliable, that this one is unreliable, that this one is unreliable, that this one's unreliable. Oops. I'm way off in another land. But there's still this one here. There's still this narration. So it's very hadith science is very complicated, because it's very tricky to figure out when something is not something the Prophet said, right? There are certain hadiths that everybody knows are made up. For example, there's a hadith that says a person from Africa, if they get hungry, they steal, and when they get full, they fornicate. This is completely made up. This is totally made up. The Prophet never said this. No one ever said this. This was something that some racists made up and attributed to the Prophet because they wanted to promote their racist agenda. So these things are baseless, right? And there's whole books in hadith criticism that deal with these baseless hadiths. Just list them all. For example, and some of them have really nice meanings. There's another hadith that says, رَأْسَ كُلِّ ذَنْبٍ حُبِّ الدُّنْيَا, or حُبَّ الدُّنْيَا رَأْسَ كُلِّ خَطِيئَةٍ, which is that the love of this earthly world is the beginning of every sin. This is true, right? This is very true. But it doesn't mean that the Prophet said it. We all hear wonderful things every day that the Prophet didn't say. It doesn't mean that they're not true. But there's also doesn't mean that it's a hadith, right? So, the point is that when you get into hadiths that are found in hadith collections that Muslims deal with on a daily basis, it's a very difficult and very complicated thing to say, no, this is not a reliable hadith, because there's so many narrations of hadiths. You have to go back and make sure that each single one of them is not reliable in order to say that that hadith in general is not reliable.